Well, hi everyone, and thank you for attending the 2012 National Convention. And also welcome to the Sustainability Advantage with Bob Willard. As a reminder, this session will be recorded for the PPPC Live Learning Center. The PPPC Live Learning Center allows you to catch up on things you might have missed, or allows you to review key information at your own pace for your continuous growth in the professional. For more information, you can always visit the PPPC booth. We hope that you will enjoy this session, this learning experience, all the while earning your points towards your certification. And now, a little bit about Mr. Willard. Speaker, author, sustainability leading expert. Bob is a leading expert on quantifying and selling business value of corporate sustainability strategies, and has given hundreds of keynote presentations to corporate, government, university, and NGO audiences. Bob applies his business and leadership experience from his 34 years at IBM Canada to engage the business community in proactively avoiding risks and capturing opportunities associated with environmental and social issues. He has authored 3 books: The Sustainability Advantage in 2002, The Next Sustainability Wave in 2005, The Sustainability Champions Guidebook in 2009. In addition, his 2 DVDs, 2 spreadsheets, numerous webinars, and extensive master slide set provide capacity building resources for champions of sustainability. They provide quantified business justification for embracing sustainability strategies and proven guidance on how to transform organizations in sustainable enterprises. Please help me welcome Mr. Bob Willard.
Thank you very much, Josie. Okay, so let's, first of all, is this okay? If I just drop it down a little bit? The reason I'm wearing this is because he's recording. It's not so that, you know, the hall can hear me. But it's actually kind of good that there are a little fewer folks here than there might otherwise be in a larger hall, because it allows me to kind of make this work for you folks. So I'm not here to tell you about the theory. I'm here to talk about the relevance of all of this stuff to what you folks do. And I need some of your help from that as well. I try to help people who care about environmental and social stuff see the business relevance of this stuff. And if it's relevant to the business, then the business will do more on this stuff than they otherwise would. That's called the business case. And the books and the DVDs that you heard referred to are trying to talk the language of business so that they do more than they're already doing, because they recognize if they do, it's good for business as well as these other things. But it's got to be good for business or they won't. So that's where we're coming from. So from your perspective, if you work in a company that's making promotional products, you can look at this from sort of 3 different lenses. One is for your own company and whether there's anything in it for you to do more than you're already doing as a company. The second part is whether or not you're starting to sense your customers are getting onto this wavelength and how you can respond to that wavelength. And the third part is whether or not your customers' customers are starting to get on this wavelength. Because very often the supply chain pressure has a real ripple effect. And there are some strange things going on in the supply chain these days. And some ways in which the companies are trying to give signals that they care about this stuff to their big buyers is in some of the things that they provide and how they provide them. So if you're looking for signals that you care about this stuff, a lot of the products that you sell, make, promote, have a lot to do with that. So when I sat down at the table, there were a whole bunch of things on the table that sent messages to me as to whether or not this organization, PPPC, cares about environmental and social stuff. So we can start with this, which is a keychain. I have no clue whether that is from recycled products or not, what it's actually made from or not. It's a really neat little product, but there is no other message with it. You with me on that? And the same thing with the pen. The color is good, right? It's green. So that's hopeful. But as I read the product and took a look at it, I can't see whether or not this is made from things that I would consider to be recycled or sustainable or biodegradable or whatever. So hard to tell. The book, on the other hand, is amazing. I mean, if you take a look at this little book, it says the notebook is made from stone paper. What the heck is stone paper, right? And you flip it over, and all of the back is talking about how sustainable, environmentally friendly, this product is. This is going to be a little bit more expensive than a notepad from the hotel would be, right? So somebody invested in a promotional product to send a message. And I thought, it's interesting as you take a look at what's on the table as to whether or not these things are sending messages not only about the organization, but about what the organization cares about. And that's very often what a promotional product can do. So that's where I'm coming from. When I talk about the sustainability advantage, what I'm saying is there may be an advantage to you or to your clients to embrace some of these environmental and social things more than you already do or they already do. So are you okay, at least at this point on the sustainability part? It's something to do with environment, that you care about the environment. It's something to do with, there's a social dimension. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but it's harder to be able to convey that. But another message is the fact that there are jugs of water and glasses on the table as opposed to what? Bottled water, right? So bottled water was all the rage, and then people started to ask some hard questions about where it's coming from, and the packaging of it, and so on, and all the plastics. So right now, there's a message that most conventions and hotels are trying to convey, which is, we care about that, that's why we're using jugs and glasses, recycled stuff. So if I take a look at your website and I try to figure out whether or not you've got products that already kind of qualify for that kind of thing, there are some things here called tote bags and some other lanyards that are made from particular kinds of products that say we care. So if you're servicing a convention which is trying to convey to their delegates that they care, then very often the kind of product that you get as a handout, whatever, says that. Do any of you make those things? You do? No?
Provide them.
Okay, you provide them? But you don't make them. I'm sorry. You source them and then you make them available. Wrong term, right? You don't make them, but you make them available. You sell them. Do you have those as well, the environmentally sensitive ones?
Yep.
Okay. So that's an option, right? If the client's interested, you've got it available. Very often, though, there's sometimes a price premium associated with this stuff, right? So clients going on price, they're also going on image, and this is where it comes back to the conversation we had before, that very often your typical contact in the organization may not be the best person to be actually making this decision alone. It could be that the communications folks, the marketing folks, the brand folks for the company need to be a little bit more a part of that because this is communicating a brand image to whoever is going to be using these things. And then I took a look at some other things. You've got some eco-right products. You've got drinkware, which takes a look at the kinds of thermoses that people might also use. Then you get into the products that they are made from, the lining of those things, the reusability of them. You get into awards and where the glass came from or where the wood came from or where the labor for it is sourced, who made it. And then you get into whether it's local or whether it came from somewhere else. These things may not mean a lot to some clients. They're starting to mean more to other clients. And that's why I think it's worthwhile at least being ready for vibes that you may not see that much of already, but it's starting to gather momentum. So the big banks, the big oil and gas companies, most mining companies, chemical companies, high-tech companies are all starting to work a little harder on conveying a message that they really do care about this stuff, and this is one vehicle for it. You with me on the connection to what you do? And even if you've heard nothing about this so far, you might take a look at the websites for your clients Even if your typical contact isn't talking about this, take a look at the website for your clients. And if they're starting to display a sustainability report or talk about environmental and sustainability footprints, those kinds of things, it's a pretty good clue that as a company they're starting to care, and you could encourage your contacts to consider other products as well. Okay, then you get into other things which may or may not be sourced through you, but you should be aware that there's some growing competition out there, that there are things that they may be able to provide which really aren't hard things, but they are kind of virtual kinds of acknowledgement of awards or whatever. So donations to charities of people's choice, carbon offsets to offset people's personal footprints. I very often get that as a speaker because I'm kind of on this stuff. By the way, my biggest challenge as a sustainability guy is walking the talk on this. And when I travel, my carbon footprint goes up. And I try to travel less by doing more webinars and video conference sessions, but I do travel. So when I do, I keep track of all of the carbon that I'm generating from whether it's flying or driving or train. And I calculate it all, and then I buy offsets. That doesn't forgive it, it just helps me remember that I need to keep working on that. And then you have matching grants as well to a cause of your choice. So lots of different ways of having promotional products as things that you reward people with as well. Enough in the context. So what I'm going to go through now is the language around sustainability, a bit of the journey that companies go through as they start to engage with this, your company or your customers' companies. And then we'll get into what it is that's causing companies to spend more time on this than they might have 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. And then we'll help you quantify what's in it for you or your client if they were to do more than they're already doing on sustainability, but that's very optional. It's up to you. So definitions of sustainability. I don't know if you've ever seen that one at the top, but that is the touchstone definition of sustainability or sustainable development. And it gets into this intergenerational responsibility. So what we're talking about is we would like the human race to stick around for a while, and therefore we need to kind of make sure that we leave a little something for the next generation, and the generation after that, and so on. It's pretty basic stuff. So for human society to continue to thrive, we need to be able to ensure that they are able to meet their needs in the future generations, as well as make sure we meet ours. So that's the intergenerational part. A lot of the concept is summarized in a very wonderfully short 4 words at the bottom, which says that we have enough of what? Everything, for all species, forever, which is a relatively long time, right? So that's kind of where this stuff is all coming from. And there are more and more people as individuals and as businesses that are starting to be a little uneasy about some of the signals that we're getting that that idea could be in jeopardy. The one in the middle, a little bit more unusual, but I kind of like one word in particular in that middle one. Any thoughts on what that word might be? Yeah, the word flourish, because very often people think that this stuff, the idea of sustainability, is going to take things away from you, that you're going to have to give up things. Actually, it could be better. So the idea of flourish is really a very powerful notion around sustainability. And in fact, if someone were to ask my wife how our marriage is, and she said, sustainable, I'd kind of like the word flourish to creep into that conversation there somewhere, because that's a part of it, right? So what we're talking about here is that this is actually a good thing. So if you start to parse the hundreds of different definitions around this thing, you end up with some fundamental ideas. Today, as well as the future, systems thinking, which is this little blue marble called Earth floating in the universe, has only got so much carrying capacity on it. There's no umbilical cord going somewhere else. So we kind of have to figure it out as to how we're going to survive on this planet. And then there's this gnarly issue of social justice and the gap between the 99% and the others. So tough issues there as well. But essentially all of these concepts distill normally down into these 3 different concepts: the economic, environmental, and social aspects of our lives. So when people are talking about sustainability, they normally talk about this 3-legged stool of sustainability. The economic, the fact that we need to make some money to live. Environmental, which is the impact that we have on the planet, and the social leg, which is all the things, especially as Canadians, that we take for granted. So making sure that we have the wherewithal to enjoy a good quality of life. And in fact, I think the terms across the bottom are even more appropriate as titles than the word sustainability, which is kind of a complicated sounding word. We're just talking about a better quality of life for everybody. These two terms tie into a wonderfully resurgent kind of approach to how we assess how wealthy we are. And it's not just money. It ties into relationships. It ties into aesthetics. It ties into a whole bunch of things. So there's some interesting metrics. The Canadian Index of Well-Being, CIW, out of the University of Waterloo, has a wonderfully robust set of economic, environmental, and social metrics that it's using. And that's intended to be a supplement to the way we normally measure progress, which is with the GDP, right? How are we doing? GDP. But as you probably understand, that's a very, very myopically, economically focused metric. And there are some people that think it would be nice if we added to that a GPI, which is a genuine progress indicator, which not only includes that, but also some of the aspects of that. And there are countries that are starting to look at that. So that's at a societal level. That's a sort of you and me level. This is kind of life, right? This is what we need. We need those kinds of things to have a good quality of life. From a business point of view, your customer's point of view, from your point of view, there are the same three legs, labeled slightly differently. These are the 3 E's and the 3 P's that we look at from a business perspective. Triple bottom line is sometimes used as an umbrella term for those things, which has a bit of a business ring to it. So the ability to keep track of how you're doing on this and that and that, it's all very good. By the way, you'll notice that this has 3 layers in it. It's how the company treats its own people. This is the HR policies, whether they treat them like dirt or whether they treat them as respected contributors to the success of the business. So internally, employees, how they relate to the community and give back and help the community be a robust community, resilient community, and the extent to which they can make a difference in the rest of the world, especially if they've got a lot of reach through their supply chains or through their customers. So internal, slightly external, very external, on those 3 layers. You also have those labels of sustainability and sustainable development that we talked about before that are used as umbrella terms for all of those things. And the reason that you see the equal signs between these is because they're becoming more and more interchangeable. So if someone's talking about sustainability, it's a pretty good bet they're talking about the same thing that someone talking about the triple bottom line is talking about. So the equal signs are to convey that they're interchangeable synonyms for the same cluster, the same trio. Okay, that's what that's trying to mean. And by the way, environmental, social, and governance. People who read business magazines like Harvard Business Review, The Economist, MIT Sloan Review, very often see that term, environmental, social, and governance, ESG, used as an umbrella term for these things. Environmental, social, and they use the word governance here for the policies and the decision-making approaches that allow the company to be able to do well. So ESG is another acronym. And then there's another one which is sometimes called corporate social responsibility, CSR, which has obviously its roots here, but it kind of touches on some of those things and these things for sure, very quickly. And even the word green, which is obviously rooted on the environmental side, obviously has economic impacts as well as some social impacts in many cases, especially when you get into pollution. So those terms are becoming umbrella terms as well, even though they were originally used a little bit more narrowly. So the reason that I'm going through this is because you don't want to get snowed by the terminology. So if your customer's talking about green, it's a pretty good bet that they may have at least a strong focus on environment, but they may also have some interest in the whole package, or sustainability or sustainable development. And one of the nice things also about the evolution of the language is that people are starting to realize that this language sounds a little complicated. I mean, God, sustainability's got 6 syllables, right? Sustainability sounds complicated. So sometimes it might be better not to call it any of this stuff and just call it asset management, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the company being better stewards of its financial capital, manufactured capital, the natural capital, which it's directly or indirectly totally dependent on. Water, energy, materials, food. So natural capital is extremely important to the success of the organization, the business. And then you get human capital, which is what? What's that code for? What's human capital? Employees, sure. People who are working in the company, so HR, personnel, so employees. And social capital. What's social capital? What's that code for? Pardon? Community. Yes, could be community. Could be some other folks too. So community is part of the social capital. Who else might you want to have good social capital with? Pardon? Yes, your customers, your clients, whoever it is that buys your products. Who else? Thank you. So the umbrella term is stakeholder, and underneath stakeholder, you have suppliers, you have clients, you have bankers, you have investors, you have the community, you have everybody that can be impacted by the organization or who can impact the organization. So even non-governmental organizations sometimes are in there. And social capital is absolutely crucial to the success of the business, because it's a way of saying it's your bank of goodwill. It's your goodwill with the people who are important to you, your stakeholders, your important stakeholders. So, very easy to measure, right? We can quantify this thing. MBAs are fantastic on helping people really, really put some numbers on that. We're getting better on some of the natural capital. This stuff is mush, right? Very, very hard to put metrics on. On the other hand, if you screw up on those two, you are out of business. So, extremely important, really important. This is the tail, those are the dog. Does that make sense to you? Yes.
It makes a lot of sense. What I'm noticing as a result of some of the economic challenges right now is that a lot of our factories who are our supporters in product are very product and price driven.
Sure.
So as a consultant and distributor of their product line, I'm seeing constantly them competing against each other for that couple of cents to be able to get that order.
Right.
What I'd like to say to them is send me somebody to meet with so that I can have a relationship with you so that we can build this business together.
Sure.
But there's very little dialogue, there's very little investment in the relationship, and there's a huge investment into their catalog and their price structure.
Absolutely. And in fact, when times get tough in a recession, people get a little frantic. Organizations get a little bit frantic. So they start to tighten the screws. And normally what they're doing is they are trying to make sure that this looks good. And the way they do that is they start to lay off people, cut back, pay them less. So as you say, try to produce whatever they're producing with less money. Or they give a little bit less to the causes they care about. They give a little bit less in the product. You start to pay extra for the product, that kind of thing, which starts to erode their social capital. And in the short term, it's brilliant. In the long term, not so much. Not so much. And that's not rocket science. Most businesses, to their credit, usually understand that. It's just that the immediacy, the short-termness in the business community really forces them to do some unfortunate things, internally as well as externally. So let me just give you a real case in point. You heard from the introduction, I used to work in IBM. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in 1992 in IBM, we were that close from going out of business. I mean, disappearing off the radar screen of the corporate world. Gone. At the time, most of us didn't know that. We knew things were a little tough, but we didn't understand that we were borrowing to pay the payroll, and we were borrowing to pay the dividends to the shareholders, which is not what you call sustainable as a way of running a company, right? So why had we gotten to that stage? Because our social capital with our customers had been very severely eroded. They didn't like us, especially our products. And why did that happen? Because we'd stopped listening to them. So our social capital was having a very negative impact on our financial capital. So we downsized. For the first time in the history of IBM, we had never, ever, ever downsized. We downsized. And you talk about a cultural trauma in an organization. That was very, very tough. So we eroded a lot of human capital, a lot of social capital, and we started, in fact, we hired a CEO from the outside for the first time, which is a huge culture shock, and started to turn the company around and especially listen to the customer, which is so basic, it's pitiful, but we kind of lost track of that. Our social capital had been severely eroded. So the reason I've gone through that little story with you is to help you understand that you can get away with not doing very well on these things for a while, but at some point there's going to be a reckoning. And we'd like that reckoning to be a good one as opposed to a bad one. So building social capital and human capital, intellectual capital, being a place that people want to work, are proud to work, extremely important. And in fact, if you get that, then those folks will figure out how to get this stuff for you and with you, and the natural capital is very, very important too, because frankly, we're running out of natural capital. It's starting to get expensive, and therefore we need to be more careful about that. So, you understand that we're running out of that stuff, right? Peak oil, you understand that one. Peak water, peak food, peak soil, peak minerals, peak everything, right? We're kind of running out of stuff. And most of us are happily just going to the store, getting the same stuff we've always got. Wait for it. Things are starting to get a little bit different. So what we're talking about here is helping a company position itself as managers of assets and capital to be able to thrive in the new economy. And therefore, using language like capital and assets might be a little bit better than using that other language. All we're talking about is being smarter about that. Sounds like a business proposition, so the language we use sometimes is helpful. Okay, in the language, we got the kind of the concept here. What are you going to hear from customers? Mostly probably about something like natural capital. Energy, water, material, waste, carbon, those kinds of things, and their determination to do better on those things. So we'll talk about that. Okay, that's the terminology tutorial. What I'm going to do now is just go through a quick little overview of the 5-stage journey that companies normally go through when they start to engage with this stuff. The first one is they clean up their act, and at least they obey, comply with the regulations, environmental regulations, pollution regulations, human rights regulations in their jurisdiction. So they stay out of jail, they don't get fined. And then some of them decide to go a little bit beyond what the regulations are requiring them to do, and they voluntarily go beyond compliance. And why would they do that? Because they can save some money. And you don't need a regulator to tell you to do that if you're in business. You just save money, right? What do you save money on? These things that are called eco-efficiencies. And there are 4 things. You save money on your energy bill, your water bill, your waste bill, and your materials bill. We don't charge much for water, so that's not a biggie. We don't charge much for waste, or we don't calculate it very well, because it's huge, but we just don't calculate it very well, so that's not a biggie. The 2 biggies are materials and energy. And the number 1 approach is energy, to begin with. So that's what very often has companies encouraging their focus on energy because they can save some money there, the so-called low-hanging fruit. And they can, of course, improve their public relations and avoid a PR crisis from doing stupid stuff as well. A PR crisis, by the way, is not necessarily with their company. It could be somebody else in their sector. So when Union Carbide had a plant in India that kind of blew up, killed hundreds of people originally right off the bat and thousands of people long term, not good. for Union Carbide, for the town, for the people, or for the chemical industry, then the chemical industry started to get a little bit twitchy about whether there'd be new regulations on their plants. And there was another incident that same year in the US. And all of a sudden they decided they better voluntarily clean up their act. So in the chemical industry, there's something called responsible care, actually started in Canada, which is their effort to ensure that the regulators did not think that they had to be regulated into cleaning up their act. They just did it voluntarily. So they go beyond compliance for very obvious reasons. And then you get into the next stage, which is integrating this right into the culture of the company so that it's very much a part of who the company is. So let me just help you understand the difference between stages 3 and 4. And I'll go back to my IBM experience again. When I was in IBM, we had some very, very good people in the Environmental Affairs Department. Environmental Affairs did great stuff, really, really good stuff. They saved a lot of energy. They made sure we didn't pollute with stuff when we made high-tech circuit boards and that kind of thing, so managed the chemicals carefully. Won awards for it, great stuff. Then we had another group that was the social folks. They looked after what were called community affairs, philanthropy, volunteerism, lots of good causes, did amazing stuff. Actually, got a lot of awards for it. Terrific. Neither of those two groups ever talked to each other, separate groups, specialists, and the rest of us in the company got on with making money. Happy once in a while when we see a little award announced that, you know, somebody got something for doing something good, but totally divorced from what that environmental and social crap had to do with our job, which was selling computers. That's essentially what selling and supporting computers was what I did for about 34 years in IBM. That's what I did. And I was happy that there were things going on in the other parts of the company that were looking after this other stuff, but totally remote from that. You with me on that? That's stage 3. Led by specialists, good people, marginalized by the rest of the business. Stage 4, everybody in the organization, everybody is thinking about the environmental and social impact of their decisions as they make them, especially in procurement. Everybody. It's baked into who the company is. Very, very different dynamic. There are no companies on the planet who are at stage 4 yet. Many of them have declared they want to get there. They're working very, very hard on getting there, but there aren't any, especially publicly traded companies, that are there yet. The good news is that they realize that if they were to get there, they would be fantastically successful, much more prosperous than they are today. So they understand that this would be good for them, as well as for the causes, if they were to get there. So stage 4 is a great stage. Stage 5, I should just acknowledge, notice the dotted line. Stage 5 companies do not go through the first 4 stages. They start and they end in stage 5. They're founded by people that just get it on this stuff. They don't even call it sustainability. It's just operating responsibly. They care about this stuff personally. It's their company, so this kind of stuff ripples through the rest of the organization. So it's a lot of small and medium-sized organizations are like that. You just don't see them. You don't hear them. They're not written up in case studies. In an MBA school, you never hear about them because they're not big enough. They're just small. How many of you have 500 employees or less in your company? Okay. How many of you have 100 employees or less in your company? Okay. Now you may think that's unusual. Just as Canadians, you should be aware that if we had a scroll here of all the companies by name in Canada, what % of that scroll do you think would be, let's say, 100 employees or less? Roughly. 75? Any other thoughts? 90? Getting warm? According to Stats Canada, 98%. 98% of the companies in Canada have 100 employees or less. If you go to 500, it's 99.7% of the companies in Canada have very few employees. Is that unusual? It's normal. Same in the US, same in Europe, same in Australia, same in New Zealand. It is normal. Most of the companies are small companies. Many of them, I suspect, are just happily kind of in stage 5, but they never think of themselves that way. So if you went up and said, congratulations on being a really sustainable enterprise, they'd say, me? Wouldn't know what you're talking about. But you can retroactively help them understand how what they're doing has a lot of the attributes of a sustainable organization. Careful about their environmental footprint, careful about their treatment of employees, careful about how they give back to the community and so on, being responsible. So the reason I'm acknowledging stage 5 that way is that most of us who care about this stuff don't have to spend a lot of time in stage 5 with stage 5 companies because they already get it. What we're really trying to do is get stage 3 companies up to stage 4, where they go further than they already are and build that kind of momentum so that we get a critical mass of companies in stage 4 and 5. That's what we're trying to get to. Understand the journey? Okay, so skill testing question. Your company, what stage are you at? How many would say that you're at stage 1? Stage 2, that you're obeying the laws, okay? How many would say that you're going beyond stage 2, you're at stage 3, where you're starting to try to consciously save money on energy, water, materials, or waste? Okay? Anybody think they're at stage 4? Okay, stage 5? All right. So one of the considerations is, who cares? And if you care, how the heck would you ever convince the rest of your company to care, right? And that's one of the books I won't be talking about today, which is how to lead change within your company without having the position power to pull it off. So how the heck do you do that to make it work? And that's what that Sustainability Champions Guidebook is all about. So let's forget about that. Let's just talk about how we get companies to go from stage 3 to stage 4, or at least get to stage 3. So let me just give you a sense of what's going on in the business community these days, just to reinforce a few vibes that you may be getting. First of all, there was an article that some of you may have heard of or seen in the Harvard Business Review a couple of years ago, and it labeled this thing as an imperative, not only a megatrend, an imperative, which is a pretty strong word. I mean, sustainability imperative says this isn't something you do in your spare time or when you got nothing else to do. This says, get on with it or you're going to get run over by the ones who do get on with it. So what they're saying is, this has emerged because the public, you and me, and governments are getting uneasy about climate change, about industrial pollution, which has been around for the last 150 years and is not going away, food safety, which is a bit of a newcomer, food safety, foods. Are you concerned about food safety, food security?
Definitely.
Why?
I don't know what's in my food anymore.
Pardon?
I don't know what I'm eating anymore.
Right, so that's a quality part, right? That's the safety, like what's actually in this, not only the food itself, but pesticides or results of processing, that kind of thing. What else concerns you about it?
How the price is going up.
Right, which gets into availability, scarcity, and so on. And, you know, we see maybe a 5 or 10% rise and we start to get twitchy. There are parts of the world that are going through 30 to 50% rise in their food price, where most of their expenses are on food, not on shelter, not on other stuff. So a lot of what's happening, especially in the Middle East, in Northern Africa and so on, you can trace back to some of the food challenges that those places have. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Russia has stopped exporting wheat. Russia was a huge exporter of wheat. Why did they stop exporting wheat? They're running out, right? So they're going to keep it, right? So that sounds like a good proposition, except if you were one of the biggest importers of Russian wheat in the world, all of a sudden you got yourself a problem, and that was Egypt. Egypt was the largest importer of Russian wheat in the world, and all of a sudden their supply got cut off, and when that's a big staple in your food supply, people get a little bit uneasy, right? So when you start to see unrest in the world, read between the lines of what's really going on, and you'll start to find that very often people are getting desperate for water or food, which is pretty basic. And the lady who was responsible for the food aspect of the United Nations said, when people run out of food, they have 3 choices. The first one is they riot. They don't know quite who they're rioting against. They just riot because they're getting desperate. And the second one is they move. They go somewhere else where there is food, at least at prices they can afford. So they move. And the third one is they die. Most people don't opt for the third option, so they kind of work on the first two. So we're starting to see migrations of people for very environmentally related things, not the least of which are food and water, and we're also starting to see unrest. So food safety is not just sort of a peripheral, isn't that too bad, we're having to pay a little bit more for our Rice Krispies these days. This is a real challenge. And natural resource depletion, that's the running out of everything, the peak minerals, the peak oil, the peak gas, peak soil, peak everything. Not only rare minerals, but minerals. And that's why the countries like China are running all over the world, buying it up like crazy. You should be aware that they're also buying up arable land like crazy. Not because they like land, but because they like food. So you get into some very interesting dynamics around all of these things. Those are 4 issues. There are a whole bunch of others. But the authors of this article said, this is what's causing people to get a little bit twitchy and they're not quite sure what to do, and therefore they're starting to point fingers at people who have influence. And the people that have influence, rightly or wrongly, are corporations. So there's this great big spotlight being put onto corporations as to how they're not only contributing to these problems, but they're helping to solve them. And is that fair? Not necessarily, but it's happening. Very, very different set of expectations starting to rise up as an imperative for companies to start helping with. Why? Because they've got the money, they've got the smarts, expertise, and they've got the resources. So governments can't do it, the public can't do it, we need help. So that's going on. So the other question is, okay, these authors say this is going on. Do CEOs sense that this is going on? And here's a very interesting trio of slides. This is the first slide from a survey of chief executive officers, 766 of them worldwide, that were surveyed on how they feel about sustainability these days. And it's very interesting to compare the results of a similar survey that was done in 2007 with the results of this survey that was done in 2010. So what you see here is that CEOs, they agree or strongly agree that sustainability should be fully embedded into the strategies and operations of their company. That's called stage 4. Fully embedded into the strategy and operations of their company. They think that's a good idea. 96% of them think that's a good idea, which is a 24% jump over 2007, which is huge. So for whatever reason, and assuming they understand what this means, they would like to get to stage 4. That is amazing. The second slide gives you a little sense of what's going on in the background. You say, okay, what are they trying to do here? What they're trying to do is meet the societal expectations. It's like social capital. Their customers, their employees, the governments and the communities and the regulators are expecting them to do more than they're already doing. And if you get those 5 stakeholders on board, you've got yourself a force. So if you sense that those folks, especially customers, consumers, clients, and employees, governments, communities, and regulators as well, but especially those top 2, really think you should be doing more, you should be doing more. Amazing. And the last one is, what do they think they're going to get from this? As you might expect, the number one thing they're going to get, thing that they think they're going to get is an improvement in their brand, their reputation. Reputation with who? The folks we saw on the previous slide, right? The ones in blue? Employees, customers, governments, regulators, and communities. And they also think that they can make more money and save money. That's eco-efficiencies. And they also think that they can get their employees really engaged. That's a huge issue in HR, is to keep your employees engaged, productive, excited, contributing, creative, innovative. Very, very, very important. Or if people can be choosy, especially the smartest people, this war for talent that's still going on out there, you want to make sure that you are a talent magnet for people that care about this stuff, and therefore they'll want to work for a company they're going to be proud to work for. Interesting dynamic. So what we see here is a bunch of things that say CEOs are smart people. But if you take a look at that, they start to look like traditional business reasons for doing anything, right? I mean, if I came to you with strategy X, and I said, you know what? If you went with strategy X, you can improve your reputation, you can save money, you can make money, and be a talent magnet, you'd say, where do I sign? That sounds like a really good strategy. And that's what's going on. They're starting to realize that this is good. It's not a problem, it's good. And that's the mindset challenge that people who are trying to encourage CEOs to do more on this sometimes hit. They can't get it through their heads that this stuff that they used to think of as just dragging them down with costs and all that stuff, all this green stuff, all these regulations, that if you go further than you're already going, it gets good. In fact, it gets really good. That's a mindset challenge. And if you start to appeal to these things, that's kind of good. Isn't that exciting? It's amazing, especially in this short period of time. During a recession, when you think they'd be tightening down everything, right? They're starting to look at these things more than they used to, which is quite amazing. By the way, this is one of a whole bunch of other surveys that are done on this stuff. This is not a unique, strange aberration on surveys. This is very, very normal. Okay, so let me give you a sense of another reason that they might be concerned about reputation. Some of you may be aware that if you are trying to assess how much your company is worth, are any of you working in companies that are traded on the stock exchange? Do you have shares? No? Okay. So stay with me on this one. Let's suppose you were. Let's suppose you had shares in your company. You're a big company, and you have some shares. And you were trying to figure out how much your company is worth. There are two ways to do that. One is you get the accountants to add up all of your assets, and you subtract all the liabilities, and you end up with what's left, the balance sheet, right? And that's what accountants help you do. It's like a giant garage sale. You just sell off everything. What do you got left? And that's what the tangibles and financials are all about. And then there's another way of assessing how much the company is worth, and that's called the market value, or the market capitalization. Market as in stock market. So you go to the stock market, and how would you figure out what the market value of the company is? What's the math? Exactly. So you take all the different shares and you multiply by the price of those shares, and you end up with a bigger number than that, because the market gives you credit for these intangibles, these non-financials, reputation, goodwill. What's an accountant give you for goodwill on a good day? Zip or a buck, because it's hard to divide by zero, so they might give you a buck. Accountants are very, very conservative folks. They will not give you much for all of this stuff, but the stock market does. Now, so what's interesting are a couple of things. First of all, the way in which that percentage, the waterline on this iceberg of value, has evolved over the last years. So back in '98, it was more like, rather than a 25-75 split, it was more like a 30-70 split. Back in '81, it was more like an 80-20 split. Back in 1978, it was more like a 95-5 split. The component of the market value that is contributing to this stock price from reputation, goodwill, and non-financials and so on has exploded. So, if you have CEOs who are paid with stock, all of a sudden they get very interested in reputation, right? Because it's a proxy for a significant component of what the stock price is all about. So, taking that, if we think of this iceberg of value and what's on the horizon that we talked about with that sustainability imperative, there are a bunch of things going on out there: climate change, poverty, social injustice, waste, food and water, over-harvesting, all of those kinds of things that are starting to converge into this infamous perfect storm of issues. And what's happening is those clouds on the horizon are starting to roil this sea of stakeholders who are swimming around the bottom of this iceberg. And if they don't like what's going on in the company, they can start to put pressure on this part of the iceberg. And if it's a lot of pressure, the whole thing sinks. So what's happening here is that we've got a whole bunch of folks who are starting to express increased interest and concern about these issues and are putting expectations on companies to help. And that ties into something called social license to operate, especially if you're in the mining industry. You'll understand that in spades. Your social license to operate is crucial. Otherwise, you don't get permits. So you can be put out of business. Actually, Enron, great example. When Enron hit the fan, remember there was a company called Arthur Andersen? Arthur Andersen? Auditors? They're auditors, right? Now, they were doing, actually, it was all legal. It's just it wasn't that ethical. But as soon as their other clients heard that they were Enron's auditors, their social capital, their social license to operate blew up. And their whole iceberg crashed. Within about 6 months, they were out of business. There was no more Arthur Andersen. Gone. Not put out of business by a court of law, put out of business by a court of public opinion. That's called your social license to operate. You lose that and you're toast. And that exists with all of these folks, some of whom are more important than others, and that's why it's very, very, very critical for companies to protect that. And that's why one of the reasons that CEOs recognize that sustainability is important is that this reputation is absolutely crucial for the ongoing success of the company. Okay, so reputation is really, really important, and therefore your products, your promotional products, send a message to all of their important stakeholders about what they care about. And more they're getting smarter about how they convey the message that they care about things that their other stakeholders care about, like environmental and social stuff. So, interesting list of things. And if you went to CEOs and you said, okay, what do you care about in 2011? What are your priorities? Which would be probably very much like 2012. But at the end of 2010, there was a survey done, and it asked for the top 10 priorities for businesses at the end of 2010 as to what they were going to focus on last year. And that's the list. Any surprises there? Well, yeah. Actually, I'm kind of surprised to see the last one on there at all, right? I mean, pleasant surprise, but kind of surprised. Would that match your organization's priorities, do you think? Or your customers' priorities as businesses? That you want to increase your overall revenue, you want to get some more customers, you want to make sure that you reduce your operating costs as much as you can, that you improve the quality of your products, that you're innovative with new products, that you're making sure you look after your talent pool, your human capital in a good way, that you don't do stuff that's stupid with the regulations and so on, and that you pay attention to some of these other things. So that's a pretty traditional kind of set. But frankly, this one really surprises me, and I'm going to give you one slide as to why I think this is surprising. The fact is that anybody in business, and you know this, anybody in business is going nuts with all of these piles of stuff that are relentless, continuously demanding their attention, their time, their effort, their smarts. So all of these things are business issues. They're an explosion of the things we saw on the previous slide. All of these things are things that they're being paid to do, that they're being measured against in terms of their success in achieving goals against these kinds of things. And if someone comes along and says, excuse me, would you like some sustainability today? Not so much, right? So if this is perceived as being another goal, at best they're going to stick it underneath the stack that's already driving them nuts and promise you they're going to get to it, but they won't. So what's happening is that smart folks are not positioning as a goal, they're positioning positioning sustainability strategies as enablers of their existing goals. They can help them get lower expenses, improve their customer care, tap into new markets, lower risks, improve their brand image, and so on. You with me on the difference in framing here? This is not a save the world message. This is a get filthy rich message. And that's the language that you need to talk, at least I find we need to talk, to get companies to stage 4. The Save the World message goes fine from stage 4 to 5, but we're just trying to get them up to stage 4. And if we can't show them that this is good for business, it's going to be a very, very tough sell. Okay, so let's take profit. I'm going to give you a quick run through of the business case for sustainability. This is my claim to fame. I quantify what's in it for a company if they really got serious about this. I mean, serious about this. Could they actually make more profit? And the answer is, yeah. So the second question is, oh yeah? How much? And that's where you have to be able to help them with that, calculate it. So, if we were to try to figure out how they could make more profit, we would need to understand how we calculate profit, which is, ta-dum, revenue minus expenses equals profit. You're all with me on that part? This is hopefully not news. Okay, so that means if we're going to say, if we're going to claim that sustainability strategies are going to enrich this line, the bottom line, is that because it's enriching the top line and or helping to reduce expenses? You with me on the logic here? So, more revenue, less expenses, more profit. How do we do all of that calculation? So, wouldn't it be nice if somebody just went to all of the press releases and the studies and the reports and the case studies and said, you know, this company seems to be saving money, and they say they're doing it because they're paying more attention to environmental stuff. I wonder who those companies are and what they're benefiting. So you do some research on that. And then you take all of these benefits, and what you do is you stick them into buckets, categories. You say, oh, there's some revenue here, and there's, oh, this is energy type stuff, and this is water type stuff. So you separate it into generic categories, and then you monetize, quantify, put some dollars on what that benefit is, and then you normalize all of that to revenue. So you can say, well, okay, they're saving some money on energy. Energy is a certain percent of revenue. Okay, so for a typical company, we can figure that out. So you normalize it to revenue. And then what you do is just go to this typical company. You say, okay, if this were a typical company, and it was making this much revenue and spending this much on other stuff, and I was able to improve those things the way these other companies have already been able to do using today's technologies and today's techniques, I wonder how good it could be for these typical companies, how much more they could make in the next 3 to 5 years just by doing whatever other people are already doing. You with me on this? This is not new stuff. We're not waiting for new technologies. We're not waiting for new regulations. We're just doing what other people already are doing. And then let's suppose we said, okay, that works for typical companies, but what about our company? So what we do is we put together a method that allows people to actually tailor this based on the information in the cases into a simulator where you put in your numbers and you see what's in it for you. So what you're going to get free is a copy of this book, The Sustainability Advantage, which is exactly what this is all about, except what I'm going to be doing, it'll be coming out later this year. There'll be a new version of that which recalibrates it all. So what you're getting is 2002 vintage, but it's still extremely relevant. And you'll also get a business case, which is the new business case, which I will give to you somehow. Do you have a website you're going to be posting this stuff on?
Yes.
Okay. So if I gave you the spreadsheets, you could make them available to anybody that cares? Okay. So it's a beta test version. It's a pre-release version of the new spreadsheets, and they're phenomenal. Sorry, they're really good. They're really good. The business case is very compelling. So here's what the way in which it's framed, and I used the income statement to be able to do that. So what are the 7 buckets? First of all, you can increase revenues. Secondly, you can also save money on those eco-efficiencies that we talked about before. Thirdly, you can also get some people benefits as well. More productivity from your workforce and be able to save money because good people aren't going to walk from the company. And you can avoid some risks. So if you go to a company and you say, well, you know, you could really make out really, really well with this stuff if you paid attention to it. And they said, nah, no thanks. We're okay. We're fine. Is there a risk for them not to do something?
Yes.
Yeah. Why? Well, because they can essentially lose some potential revenue or not get as much as they're already getting, or they can find that their expenses keep going up and they're not doing active things to reduce them, and therefore they're going to have an increase in expenses which is going to jeopardize their profit. So that's the framework. 7 benefits. So how much can a typical company save? Well, they can make at least 9% more revenue than they're already making from 3 different sources. Some of it comes from reputation, some of it comes from new products, some of it comes from selling services. Because if you get really good at this stuff, you can sell your expertise to other people who are trying to figure it out. So there's a little company in Cambridge, Ontario. I don't know if you're familiar with Cambridge, Ontario, just an hour or so from here, called Veriform. They make metal stuff. They fabricate metal. They saw it, they bend it, they drill it. It's very, very heavy stuff, heavy, dirty stuff. And the guy in charge of this company, small and medium-sized enterprise, less than 100 people, about 40 people, got religion on this, and he decided he was going to save energy. And this guy got really, really good at saving energy. Just from saving energy over 3 years, he increased his profit, bottom line, by 76%. Just by saving energy. And when I heard him give that story, I thought, there's no way you could possibly do that. And then he shared with me all of his financial statements for those years, and he did it. And he also expanded his plant, doubled it in size, and he still made that much more profit. So, and he now has a separate company called Vera Green, which sells that expertise to other metal fabricating companies. It's a new revenue stream for him. He's selling consulting. A metal fabricator, for God's sake. I mean, this guy was, you know, is a kind of rough and tumble type of guy, and he is out there consulting with other companies on how to do what he does. It's a new revenue stream. So lots of revenue opportunity. You can reduce your energy. There are companies that have reduced it by 100%. In fact, they've reduced it so much they're selling it back to the grid, but I'm assuming you can save at least 75% of whatever you're still spending on energy. Same for waste. Reduce it by 20%, reduce your material costs by 10%, increase your productivity by 2%. Reduce your turnover by 25%. And if you did all of those things, for a typical company, you would improve your profit by 51 to 81%. That's a lot of money in 3 to 5 years, 51 to 81%. And over on the risk side here, you can avoid an erosion of your profit, which could be as much as 16 to 36% if you don't do more than you're already doing. And you can cream off some of what you're saving from these two things and squirrel it away into a sustainability capital reserve from which you can start to fund new projects that allows you to repay the money back to this and start to get a real momentum going as well. So, how do I know that? How do I know that? Well, by the way, the biggest problem I had was keeping that 51 to 81% under 100%. Why would I want to keep it under 100%? Pardon? It doesn't. It's way too big. It is way too big. In fact, 51 to 81% is in danger of being way too big as well. But if I ever got it above 100%, people would just disconnect. They could not get their heads around how that's possible. It is possible. I didn't want to start there. I want to start low. So every one of the assumptions behind those things is ridiculously conservative. Compared to what real companies have been able to do, really, really conservative. Why? Because I want to start low and allow people to put in their numbers and see what's in it for them and surprise themselves. So the typical companies, the companies that led to this kind of thing. How would you know a typical company if you saw one? I had 4 companies, but the 2 ranges is a small professional services, like a consulting company with 6 people, and a large manufacturing company with 3,000 to 4,000 people. How do I know those are typical? By analyzing a painful number of databases that describe what these companies are like, coming up with typical revenue, energy, materials, salary, profit numbers for those companies, average salary and number of employees for those organizations as well. That's the starter set. 7 numbers. You plug those in, your real numbers in, and you can see what's in it for you. But for these organizations, this company can make at least 51%, the other one 81%, and save or avoid a risk to their profit of 16%, and the other one 36%. Isn't this amazing? So the question that screams at you is, if it's so good, why isn't everybody doing it? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think it's mindset. I think people can't, as you say, it's too good to be true, right? But if you turn the crank on the numbers, this is so good, it's incredible. And I'm not making it up. Every assumption is based on what real companies have been able to do. So what you'll get, by the way, are the spreadsheets that have all of the assumptions behind all of that stuff. And there are comments that explain every single one of the assumptions. So take a look at it. And what I encourage you to do is tailor it to your own purposes. If you think it's useful, give it away. I don't care. Re-swizzle it and sell it. If you want to make a buck, go for it. I don't care. My particular agenda is to get this into the hands of people that can use it and build the momentum so we get a critical mass of companies at stages 4 and 5. So whatever works. Now, where's the money coming from for all this? Is this really going to work? Where's the money coming from? Well, it's coming from 5 different sources. First of all, an amazing amount can be done within existing budgets. That guy that I talked about for Veriform, before he formed Vera Green, he didn't get any special he didn't borrow money for it. He just used his existing budget. The payback period on 42 different projects that he did, the average payback period was 6.3 months. Months. In some cases, it was weeks. I mean, you talk about low-hanging fruit. This stuff is workable within today's budgets in many, many cases. The second thing is there's a lot of stuff out there waiting for companies to come and apply for it in Canada as well as in the U.S., in fact, any jurisdiction. Plus, we're also squirreling away some money that we can fund new projects with. So there's self-funding as well. Remember that capital reserve? We took some of the waste and the materials savings and we've put it into that. So that's another pool of capital that we are self-funding with. We also have the ability to go to existing bankers and investors and so on and get money at a discount. How do we know that? Because we've got studies that say you can get it at a discount. Cheaper money. Why? Because it's sustainability projects. Go figure. So you can also go to external markets, plus you can start treating this not as a cost, but as an investment. And the return on your investment is phenomenal, 25, 30%, sometimes 50%. And in all of the calculations, I don't assume that, I don't count the benefit until the cost of getting that benefit has been paid off. So I'm assuming that after 3 to 5 years, you've got this 51 to 81% improvement. The first year you get a little bit, second year a little bit more, third year and so on, but you build up to that. And the reason is I know it's going to take a couple of years for some of these projects to pay themselves back to have a return on investment that's within the payback period. So what we're talking about here is only counting net benefits. So all of that's documented as well. It's a good deal. It's a really good deal. So what we're talking about here is trying to get the message out that we help companies ease themselves from here and clean up their own act and their supply chain and then their products, and then they get into governance, and then they get up to stage 4. And what we're trying to do is get a critical mass. And a critical mass, according to people who really get into change theory, including Malcolm Gladwell. Have you heard of the Tipping Point book? Great book. The guy's amazing. What he says is you get a critical mass, 20% of any population on board, and all of a sudden magic happens, especially if they're the right 20%. Change theory says it's somewhere between 17 and 23. I like the way you just chose 20. And that's it. All we need to do is get a critical mass of companies doing it for business reasons or for different purposes, and we're home free. The rest will just happen, especially if they're the big guys. Like Walmart, like Hewlett-Packard, like Procter & Gamble, like the American government, like Intel, like GE, like Siemens, like Caterpillar. All of these folks are turning the screws in their supply chains, big time. Big time. And they're in most cases starting with carbon, asking interesting questions about carbon. Are any of you selling stuff to Walmart? You know how many suppliers Walmart has, roughly? Yeah, 100,000 suppliers. Most of them are somewhere else. 100,000 suppliers. They sent a 15-question sustainability survey to all 100,000 suppliers 2 years ago. 15 questions. They asked them about their carbon, their energy, their water, their materials, and how they were treating their employees, and how they were relating to the community. Social, environmental, all that stuff. And all they were asking was, do you know? Do you know how much those things are? Have you publicly declared what those goals are? It's a very soft set of questions. But I'll tell you, when Walmart kind of asks those questions, their suppliers sit up pretty straight because they've got a lot of clout, right? So Procter & Gamble, for example, got this questionnaire from Walmart, and they said, who the heck do you think you are asking us these questions? Governments can ask these questions, but Walmart? This is not about our product. This is about us as a company. And Walmart said, hey, look, if you don't want to fill out that questionnaire, we totally understand. And if you'd rather not be one of our suppliers, that's okay. So all of a sudden, Procter & Gamble thought this was a really neat idea. And now they've gone to all of their suppliers, 60,000 suppliers, and asked them identical questions. So the ripple effect is happening. And that's why I was saying initially that the customers that you are serving may be in someone else's supply chain, and they're trying to convince that buyer that they really care, and some of the promotional products that you can make available to them may send that message to them. The supply chain action in the last 3 years is incredible. It's really happening. U.S. government, 600,000 suppliers, has now required all of them to declare what their carbon footprint is, which is tricky because there's a whole set of protocols called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol on how to do that. Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3, which includes travel and all that kind of stuff. Huge calculations, and they just want to know. Just curious. That's stage 1. Second one is, what are you doing about it? Stage 3 is, we want you to improve on it. It's happening, and despite all of the climate change deniers, this is happening big time. It's picking up momentum in the last year. You wouldn't believe it from the media coverage, but it's going on in the back rooms. So what's happening here is that there is a lot of momentum going to try to get the attention of companies on these things. So let me just ask for a show of hands here. Critical mass, 20%. How long do you think it'll take before we get to a critical mass of companies that are at stages 4 or 5? Do you think it's 0 to 5 years? Do you think it's 5 to 10, 10 to 15, more than 15, or never? So mentally make a decision and just raise your hand when I point to it. 0 to 5 years. A few of you. 5 to 10. A few more. 10 to 15. A couple more. More than 15? Never? Okay. So, interestingly, there was a survey done of chief executive officers. Same question. How long do you think it'll take, Mr. CEO, before we get there? Here's their answers. 0 to 5 years, 10% of them said that. Another 44%, which adds up to 50, more than half, say 5 to 10 years. 10 to 15 years, we get up to 80%. I would never have thought that. I'm in this stuff, but I would never have thought that. That's exciting. So there is something going on, and the vibes that you get from your clients around this stuff may start to change, especially if you start to listen for it and realize that, geez, you've got products that you never thought might be of interest to them, and maybe there's a market there. And if the product is a little bit more expensive, maybe the way they sell that, or they rationalize that, is they're not buying a promotional product, they're buying a communications vehicle. This is a part of their brand image that they're building. And all of a sudden you get the marketing and communications folks all excited about this as well. So what's going on here is that companies are spending more on this stuff, even during the downturn, during the recession, 2008, 2009. 25% of the companies out there increased what they were spending on sustainability. 4% didn't change at all. In 2010, almost 60% increased what they were spending on sustainability. And their plans for 2011, according to this survey that was done in February of 2011, was 70% were going to increase. They're spending more on this stuff. Opportunities. So what we're talking about is you've already got, as a collection of companies, a pretty good assortment of stuff. Some of it's already labeled with things that make it look like you care. There may be opportunities there for each of your organizations to think about where the other opportunities are too. Local artists making things out of recycled products and so on may be attractive to some folks. It's amazing how creative they get into, especially get into wear, apparel. Incredible stuff. Where was it sourced? What's it made from? There's an organization called Me Too We. Thank you very much. Me Too We. Bamboo stuff, sourced in very, very ethically run factories. So the Kielburger brothers are doing some amazing things, and a lot of their customers for their products are companies that care about this stuff, and they just put the company's logos on it and so on. So it's amazing what's going on. Anybody from Vancouver? Okay, there's a company out there called Sol Good. I think it's All Good, but the guy's name is Sol Good, so I think he just kind of slurs it, Sol Good. And he makes stuff from recycled glass, recycled wood, some cases recycled plastic. All the packaging is very, very environmentally thought through and so on. So there are companies that are concerned enough about these things that they're more and more interested in the attributes of it. So when I have a business card made, there are a whole bunch on the table here as well, I have almost as much on the back of the card as I have on the front of the card, because this is kind of my indication that I care about this stuff. So I'm on the front, but the back talks about where the paper came from and the way in which it was produced from Cascade. And then there's a printing company that printed these things, and the extent to which they're powered by Bullfrog Power and so on. So a bit of your brand is conveyed in a whole lot of different ways. For years, I could not find paper that could take a color print effectively, and they found that for me. The only printer in the whole Toronto GTA area that could, and they found the paper, and they're great. And now they're actually doing a lot of those. So what's happening here is that businesses are starting to understand that there are expectations they hadn't realized before, and if they step up to those, it's really smart business. Huge effect in the supply chains, which is where you folks might come in. Promotional products are symbolic gestures. If a company has a green building, you heard of green buildings, right? You know what the certification is for green buildings, the one that in North America? LEED, right? So if a company has a LEED building, they're not only doing that to save energy, they're doing it as a badge of honor. You know, we care about this stuff. Our headquarters is a LEED standard building. So they're very much into sending messages out there, marquee type messages that say, we care about this stuff. And there are 3 ways that companies do that. One is the building. The second one is what they print their annual report on, FSC certified paper, all of the inks and all that kind of stuff. And the third one is the kinds of things that they give out to people. They convey messages. You're part of that. And there may be a way for you to tap into that in a more aggressive, creative way than you thought of before. Lots of opportunity for leadership, both within your organization as well as the ripple effect of that, and huge numbers of organizations out there that can help you figure that out. NGOs as well as for-profit companies as well. So food for thought, that there may be an advantage here within your own organization as well as with your clients that at some point might be worth tapping into. Questions?
I would like you to know that your association is becoming more and more sustainable. That our event is both from power, for example, at the MTCC, that we try to work with sites and hotels that are also sustainable, that have a green policy in place. And the board also is very going for it. Jose is a board member. And we're working very, very hard towards becoming more and more sustainable. We have our green, in the weekly, we have a green, what's it called? Anyway, sustainability advantage also in our weekly, and we try to give you tips. I did personally follow a natural step session. I was there for a 2-day session, so I received my certificate. And
Good for
there
you.
are very good free webinars from the Natural Step as well. So if you are interested, I will be very happy to send you the link. And I know a little bit more, and I was very, very interested by your presentation. And I'd like to thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, just to clear the air on what I do and what I don't do consulting. I do this, talks, and I write books. There are lots of people who write books so that they can do consulting. Consulting would tie me down too much. I'm kind of a Johnny Appleseed of this stuff. I give talks. I plant seeds. Some of them sprout, some of them don't. That's life. But I think that's a niche that I can be effective in. And I try to provide resources to people that care about this stuff. Slides, DVDs, spreadsheets, books that help them improve their skills on doing this stuff. So when I say these things are free, I hope you, if you don't use them, give them to somebody else that might be interested in them. Could be a customer, don't know. The spreadsheets that are going to be on the website, if you find that there is a conversation you're having with a client where those things might be appropriate for them to try, give them to them. Okay, so what we're into here is trying to build awareness, and these tools may help build the awareness. So it's a very genuine offer for you to use and abuse this stuff any way you can, because there's exciting stuff going on out there, and it's good for all of us if we can do a little bit more. So go for it. So all of these books, by the way, are free. If you want a copy for yourself, if you want a copy for somebody else, help yourself. There's a movie version of the book. The Business Case for Sustainability is a video of me doing a talk on this. It's a few years old, but the spreadsheet you're going to get will update all of that. And some people like watching rather than reading, so, you know, if that is something you want to do, go for it as well.
Mr. Wood, I really want to thank you.
Bob.
I found this session really, really interesting, and I want to thank you for the level of generosity that you have into just sharing freely all of this. And I think it's something that's going to be advantageous to us, to the future generations. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And on
This
behalf
is
of
great.
the association,
Ooh.
I'll give you a little thank you gift. So
Thank you very much.
for your time.
That's very nice. Ooh, very classy. Thank you.